Are you serious? This is yours now." The delivery driver's hands trembled as he ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the brand-new truck. His old beat-up van, with its rusted doors and engine that sputtered at every stoplight, was parked just a few feet away. Just yesterday, he was struggling to make ends meet. Just yesterday, he had no idea his entire world was about to change. But how did we get here? To understand why a CEO went undercover to meet this driver, and why he made a life-changing decision that would leave everyone speechless, we need to go back to where it all started. It began as a simple idea. James Carter, the CEO of a massive nationwide delivery company, sat in his office, staring at his laptop screen. Numbers, graphs, profit margins. All of it looked great on paper, but James wasn't convinced. Lately, he had been hearing rumors, drivers quitting, packages delayed, complaints stacking up. The reports coming in from his regional managers made no sense. How could one of the biggest delivery companies in the country be struggling at the ground level when everything at corporate looked fine? James needed answers, real ones. So he came up with a plan. He would go undercover as a new employee in his own company. He had seen those viral undercover boss stories before, but this wasn't for TV. This was personal. He needed to see what his workers were dealing with firsthand. So, for the first time in over a decade, James took off his expensive suit, swapped it for a cheap work uniform, and signed himself up for the most grueling job at his own company, a delivery driver. No one knew who he really was. His first shift started at 5:30 a.m. in a massive warehouse filled with tired workers. The energy in the building was off. Some people looked exhausted before they even started working. Others moved like robots, scanning packages, loading trucks, barely speaking. James knew efficiency mattered in logistics, but this wasn't efficiency. This was burnout. As James grabbed his first set of packages for the day, another driver bumped into him. A guy in his late 20s wearing an old cap pulled low over his eyes. "First day?" the guy asked. "Yeah," James replied, adjusting the heavy box in his arms. "Good luck, man," the guy chuckled, shaking his head. "You're gonna need it." James wasn't sure what he meant yet. Then came the real test, the delivery route. By 6:15 a.m., James was already drenched in sweat. His truck was packed tight with boxes, and the GPS screamed at him to move faster. The stops were relentless, one after another, no time to breathe. At first, James tried to keep up the pace. But after just 2 hours, his body was aching, his uniform sticking to his back and his legs begging for a break. Yet, as tough as it was for him, he noticed something that hit him even harder. The other drivers were suffering even more. Most of them had older trucks, ones that broke down often, had no AC, and were barely holding together. Some of them were skipping lunch just to finish their routes on time. And then, there was one driver in particular. James had seen him at the warehouse earlier that morning, same guy who had warned him about the job. He drove one of the worst-looking trucks in the fleet, an ancient, rusted thing that coughed out black smoke every time it started. But what caught James' attention wasn't the truck. It was the way this guy worked. No complaining, no shortcuts. Just pure dedication. Even when his truck broke down twice that day, he kept going, delivering packages on foot when necessary. James couldn't ignore it. He needed to know more about this driver. So, on his lunch break, he sat next to him in the warehouse break room. "I gotta ask, man," James said, taking a sip of water. "How long have you been doing this?" The driver wiped sweat from his forehead. "Too long." "Why not quit?" James asked. The guy let out a small laugh. "And do what?" "Jobs ain't easy to find when you've got responsibilities." James nodded. He had a feeling there was more to this. "I'm James, by the way," he said. "Alex," the driver replied. There was a pause. Then Alex sighed and leaned back. "You ever feel like, no matter how hard you work, you're just stuck?" James felt his stomach tighten. He had been a billionaire CEO for years now, but he hadn't forgotten what it felt like to struggle. "Yeah," James admitted. "I've felt that before." Alex nodded, staring down at his hands. "I got a kid," he said suddenly. James blinked. "Really?" "Yeah, little girl, she's 6. Alex exhaled. "I work every shift I can to keep a roof over our heads. Some days, man, I don't even see her. She's asleep when I leave, asleep when I get home." James didn't know what to say, because in that moment he realized something. This wasn't just a hardworking delivery driver. This was a father, a man trying to give his daughter a better life. And yet his company, the company James had built from the ground up, was barely paying him enough to survive. That didn't sit right with him. At that moment, James made a decision. He wasn't just going to fix the problems in his company. He was going to change Alex's life. And that was only the beginning. But before we get to that, if you believe hardworking people like Alex deserve better, hit that like button. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if you were in James' position? James sat back in his chair, staring at the monitor in disbelief. He had expected to find employees cutting corners, maybe some inefficiencies in the process, but he hadn't expected this. Alex, the delivery driver he had met earlier, wasn't just hardworking. He was carrying a burden far heavier than James had imagined. The footage showed Alex arriving at the warehouse before sunrise, well before his shift even started. While other employees trickled in at their assigned times, Alex was already loading his truck, double-checking orders, and even helping newer drivers organize their routes. It was clear he cared, not just about his own job, but about making sure the entire operation ran smoothly. James leaned forward as he clicked through the footage. Hour after hour, Alex was on the move. No wasted time, no complaints, just relentless effort. Even when one of the other drivers struggled with a jammed dolly, Alex rushed over to help, despite being behind on his own deliveries. But then came the part that really caught James off guard. The camera inside Alex's truck revealed more than just packages. In the backseat, tucked between a pile of neatly folded blankets, was a small pillow, a travel-sized toothbrush, and a duffel bag filled with clothes. James exhaled slowly. "Is he living in his truck?" he muttered. He rewound the footage, watching as Alex finished his last delivery late at night. Instead of driving home, Alex pulled into a quiet parking lot, turned off the engine, and leaned back in his seat. Within minutes, he was asleep, still wearing his work uniform. James' mind raced. This wasn't just about a hard worker going above and beyond. Alex was homeless. He was spending all day delivering packages, making sure customers got what they needed, and at night, he had nowhere to go but the front seat of his truck. James clenched his jaw. No one should have to live like that, especially not someone this dedicated. Determined to learn more, James reached for his phone and called the warehouse manager, a man named Rick. "Hey, Rick, quick question. Do you know much about Alex, one of our delivery guys?" There was a pause. "Alex, yeah, of course, he's one of our best. Always on time, never complains, works harder than most guys here. Why?" James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Just curious. Have you ever noticed anything unusual about him?" Rick sighed. "Well, now that you mention it, yeah. I've noticed he never talks about home, and sometimes he sticks around after his shift longer than necessary. I figured maybe he just likes to keep to himself." James drummed his fingers on the desk. "Has he ever mentioned struggling with money?" Rick hesitated. "Not directly, but I know he picks up extra shifts whenever he can. I just assumed he was saving up for something." James nodded, his suspicion confirmed. "All right, thanks, Rick." He hung up and leaned back in his chair. This was bigger than he thought. The company was doing well, really well. Yet, here was one of their most dedicated employees struggling to afford a place to live. James knew he couldn't just ignore this. He had the power to change things, and he was going to start with Alex. But first, he needed to learn more. The next morning, James put on his disguise again. Baseball cap, fake mustache, worn-out hoodie, he looked the part of a new hire. He arrived at the warehouse just as the sun was coming up, knowing Alex would already be there. Sure enough, Alex was in the loading dock, lifting boxes into his truck. James approached, playing the role of a clueless new guy. "Hey, you're Alex, right?" Alex looked up and smiled. "Yeah, that's me." "You must be the new guy." James nodded. "Yeah, first day." "No idea what I'm doing." Alex chuckled and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Don't worry, man, I'll show you the ropes." For the next few hours, James shadowed Alex, watching how he worked. There was no slacking, no cutting corners. Even when the sun beat down and the work got exhausting, Alex kept going. But between deliveries, James started to dig a little deeper. "So how long you been working here?" James asked casually. "Couple years," Alex said, adjusting his grip on a heavy box. "It's a solid job, keeps me busy." James nodded. "You always wanted to do delivery work." Alex shrugged. "Not really, but life doesn't always go the way you plan." James glanced at him. "Yeah. What you want to do?" Alex hesitated for a second before answering. "I was studying to be a mechanic. Cars, engines, all that stuff, I loved it. But school's expensive and, well, things got complicated." James could hear the weight in his voice. "Complicated how?" Alex sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Family stuff. Had to take care of some things. School had to wait." James didn't push, but he understood. Alex had sacrificed his dream for survival. They pulled up to another house, and as Alex hopped out, James noticed something. Alex's shoes worn out, the soles barely holding together. His uniform clean but old, the logo on his shirt faded from years of washes. Everything about Alex screamed hard work, sacrifice, and resilience. James clenched his fists. He had seen enough. By the time they finished the last delivery, James had made up his mind. "Hey, man," James said as they parked the truck. "I appreciate you showing me the ropes today." Alex smiled. "No problem, you'll get the hang of it." James hesitated for a moment, then added, "You ever think about going back to school? For mechanics, I mean." Alex chuckled, but there was a sadness behind it. "Every day, but like I said, life happens." James nodded slowly. "Yeah, but sometimes life surprises you." Alex gave him a confused look, but James just smiled. He had a plan, and Alex had no idea his life was about to change forever. That night, James couldn't shake the conversation he had with Alex. The way Alex had brushed off his struggles like they were just another part of life didn't sit right with him. He had the power to change things, not just for Alex, but for hardworking employees like him who often went unnoticed. James grabbed his phone and made a call. "Hey, I need you to do something for me," he said. The next morning, James arrived at the warehouse again, still in disguise. He wasn't there to work a shift, he was there to set things in motion. As expected, Alex was already there, unloading a new shipment. James approached casually. "Morning," he said. Alex glanced up and grinned. "Back for round two," James smirked, something like that. He watched as Alex moved through his routine, effortlessly lifting heavy boxes, double-checking addresses, and making sure everything was perfectly organized. His attention to detail was something James rarely saw in entry-level employees. They hopped into the delivery truck, and as Alex started the engine, James decided to dig deeper. "So, you ever think about asking for a raise?" James asked. Alex chuckled. "I mean, sure, who does? But guys like me, we don't exactly have leverage, you know. There's always someone else who can take the job." James frowned. "Yeah, but you work harder than half the people here. Doesn't that count for something?" Alex exhaled, focusing on the road. "Look, man, I learned a long time ago that life isn't always fair. Some people get lucky, some don't. I don't waste time worrying about what I can't control. I just keep moving." James admired that mindset, but he also knew that sometimes people needed a break, someone to recognize their worth. They spent the next few hours delivering packages, and with every stop, James became more certain of his plan. By lunchtime, Alex pulled into a gas station and cut the engine. "Need to refuel?" James asked. Alex shook his head. "Nah, just grabbing a snack." James watched as Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. He hesitated, counting the cash carefully before finally stepping out of the truck. James followed him inside. Alex grabbed a small sandwich and a bottle of water. He eyed a bag of chips for a moment but then put it back on the shelf. James took note. Every penny counted for Alex. At the counter, Alex paid in cash, then stepped aside while James grabbed a coffee. When they walked back to the truck, James decided to push a little further. "Hey man," he said. "You ever need help with anything? I mean outside of work?" Alex gave him a sideways glance. "Why do you ask?" James shrugged. "I don't know, just seems like you got a lot on your plate." Alex exhaled. "Look, I appreciate it, but I'm good, always have been." James could tell he wasn't used to people offering help. It was like he had spent so long relying on himself that he didn't even consider another option, and that only made James more determined. Later that afternoon, they pulled up to a house with a large package. Alex hopped out and James followed. As Alex knocked, James noticed something across the street. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, was sitting on the curb, staring at the delivery truck with wide eyes. James nudged Alex. "Looks like you got a fan." Alex followed his gaze and chuckled. "Yeah, kids love these trucks." Without hesitation, Alex jogged over to the boy. "Hey, buddy," he said. "Like trucks?" The boy nodded eagerly. Alex opened the back and grabbed an empty box. "Wanna help me deliver this?" The kid's eyes lit up and he jumped to his feet. Alex handed him the box, guiding him up the driveway. The boy knocked on the door, and when the homeowner answered, Alex played along. "Special delivery." The homeowner smiled, giving the little boy a high five before taking the package. As the boy ran back to his house, beaming, James just stared at Alex. "You do that a lot?" James asked as they climbed back into the truck. Alex shrugged. "Why not? Kids get a kick out of it." James shook his head, grinning. Alex didn't just do his job, he made people's days better without even thinking about it. As they pulled back onto the road, James' phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and saw a message. "It's ready. Everything's set." James smirked. It was time. By the end of the shift, as Alex parked the truck back at the warehouse, James turned to him. "Hey, before you go, mind giving me a ride somewhere?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "Where to?" James hesitated, then said, "Just trust me." Alex hesitated but nodded. "All right, hop in." James directed Alex toward a nearby dealership, the lot filled with shiny new vehicles. As Alex pulled in, he looked confused. What are we doing here?" James unbuckled his seatbelt. "Just come with me." Reluctantly, Alex followed. They stepped inside and a salesman immediately greeted them. "Mr. Carter, everything's set." Alex frowned. "Wait, Mr. Carter." James turned to Alex and pulled off his cap. "I haven't been completely honest with you," James said. "My name's James Carter, I own this company." Alex's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" James gestured to the showroom floor. "And I think it's time someone finally recognized all the work you've put in." The salesman handed James a key, and James held it out to Alex. "This," James said, "is yours." Alex stared at the key, then at James. What do you mean?" James smiled. "You've been delivering packages for years. You take care of customers, you go above and beyond, and you never ask for anything in return. But I've seen how hard you work. I've seen the sacrifices you make. And I know you've been living in that truck." Alex swallowed hard, his hands trembling. James nodded toward the parking lot. "So, I got you something better." Alex turned, and for the first time he saw it. A brand new truck. Not just any truck, fully loaded, spotless, and with his name already on the paperwork. Alex blinked, his breath shaky. This isn't real." James clapped a hand on his shoulder. "It is. You've earned this, Alex." Alex's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in a long time, someone saw him, someone cared, and his life would never be the same. Alex stood frozen, his eyes locked on the brand new truck in front of him. He had spent years driving a vehicle that barely ran, sleeping in its cramped cabin, and praying it would hold up for just one more delivery. Now in front of him was something he never imagined would be his. James placed the key in Alex's hand. "Go on," he said. "Take a look." Alex hesitated, his fingers trembling as they closed around the key. Slowly, he approached the truck, running his hand along its sleek, polished exterior. The sun reflected off the windshield, making it feel even more surreal. James watched as Alex carefully opened the door and climbed inside. The scent of new leather filled the cabin. The seats weren't torn. The dashboard wasn't cracked. The steering wheel wasn't worn down to the metal. It was perfect. Alex gripped the wheel, his breath shaky. I don't know what to say," he whispered. James leaned against the open door. "You don't have to say anything." Alex looked at him, eyes filled with disbelief. "But why me?" James exhaled. "Because I've been where you are, Alex. I know what it's like to work yourself to the bone and feel like no one sees you. But I see you. I see how hard you work, how much you care about the job, how you treat people. And I know you've been struggling, even though you never complain. You deserve this." Alex shook his head, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to repay you." James smiled. "You don't have to, just keep being you." Alex swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. He looked back at the truck, then at James. Can I drive it?" James chuckled. "Of course, it's yours." Alex started the engine, and the powerful hum filled the dealership lot. He gripped the wheel, as if making sure it was real before shifting into drive. Slowly, he pulled out of the parking space and onto the road. James rode in the passenger seat, watching as Alex adjusted to the feeling of actually driving something new. It was clear from his expression that he still didn't fully believe this was happening. "This thing drives smooth," Alex muttered, shaking his head. James smirked. "A little different from your old truck, huh?" Alex let out a small laugh. "A little." They drove for a few miles, and James could see the tension in Alex's shoulders start to ease. For the first time, he wasn't worried about whether his truck would break down in the middle of a shift. After a while, Alex pulled into a quiet parking lot and cut the engine. He rested his hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Then, he exhaled shakily. "I never thought something like this would happen to me," he admitted. James leaned back. "Why not?" Alex hesitated. "Because guys like me don't get lucky breaks. We work, we struggle, we keep going, but this is different." James nodded. "It is different, but you didn't get this because of luck, Alex. You got this because you earned it." Alex ran a hand through his hair, still processing everything. "I don't even know what to do next." James smirked. "Well, you could start by moving out of your old truck." Alex laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea." They sat in silence for a moment before Alex spoke again, his voice softer. "You know, I've been saving up," he said. "I wanted to get a place, something small, but every time I got close, something came up. Bills, repairs, life." James listened closely. Alex sighed. "I guess I just got used to the idea that this was how things were always gonna be." James leaned forward. "What if I told you that doesn't have to be your reality anymore?" Alex looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" James pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. "You've been one of the most dedicated workers I've seen. And I don't just mean doing deliveries. I mean the way you handle things, the way you treat people." "That's rare," Alex shrugged. "I just do my job." James nodded. "Exactly, and that's why I want to offer you something more." Alex raised an eyebrow. "More?" James turned his phone around, showing Alex an email draft. It was a job offer, a management position. Alex stared at the screen, his heart pounding. "This is for you," James said. "A chance to step up. More pay, better benefits, and no more sleeping in trucks." Alex's mouth opened, but no words came out. "I know it's a lot to process," James continued. "And you don't have to decide right now, but I see leadership in you, Alex, and I think you'd be damn good at this." Alex leaned back, running a hand over his face. I don't even know what to say. James smiled. Take your time. Alex stared at the phone screen again. The numbers, the title, the reality of it all. It was overwhelming. He had spent so long surviving that he never even considered what it would be like to truly live. Finally, he looked at James. You really think I can do this? James didn't hesitate. I know you can. Alex inhaled deeply, his hands tightening on the wheel. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Alex sat in the driver's seat of his brand new truck, gripping the wheel as he stared at the job offer on James' phone. His mind raced. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a lifeline, a chance to break free from the cycle of struggling just to get by. He looked at James. What if I mess it up? James shook his head. You won't. Alex exhaled, glancing back at the screen. I've never done anything like this before. I don't know the first thing about running a team. James leaned back in his seat. You already do, Alex. You just don't realize it yet. Alex frowned. How do you figure? James smirked. I've been watching you, the way you treat people, the way you solve problems. You take responsibility, you care about the job, and people listen to you. Alex let out a nervous chuckle. I don't think anyone's ever said that about me before. James shrugged. Maybe no one's taken the time to notice, but I have. Alex stared at the job offer again, his hands tightening around the phone. This wasn't just about a paycheck. It was about proving to himself that he was worth more than just surviving. He took a deep breath. What would I even be doing? James smiled. Managing logistics, overseeing deliveries, making sure things run smoothly, and most importantly, making changes where they're needed. Alex raised an eyebrow. Changes? James nodded. Like better working conditions, more support for drivers. You've lived through the worst of it. Now you'd have the power to fix it. Alex swallowed. The idea of being in a position to help others, to actually make a difference, it was a lot to take in. He looked out the windshield, thinking about all the nights he had spent in his old truck, exhausted and barely making ends meet. He thought about the drivers he'd worked alongside, guys just like him, struggling in silence. This was bigger than just a job. It was a chance to change everything. Slowly, he turned back to James. When would I start? James grinned. Whenever you're ready. Alex let out a breath. Then I guess I'm ready. James extended a hand. Welcome to the team. Alex shook it, still in disbelief. For the first time in years, he felt like his life was moving forward. The next morning, Alex walked into the company's headquarters for the first time. It was a massive contrast to the warehouses and truck stops he was used to. The lobby was sleek, modern, and bustling with employees in crisp business attire. He felt completely out of place. James walked beside him, sensing his hesitation. You okay? Alex nodded slowly. Yeah, just not used to this. James chuckled. Give it time. They made their way to a conference room where several executives were already waiting. Alex recognized a few faces from his time as a driver, but most were unfamiliar. James gestured for him to take a seat. All right, let's get started. One of the executives, a woman in a tailored suit, raised an eyebrow. So, this is the new logistics manager. Alex straightened his back, feeling the weight of their judgment. James nodded. That's right. Another executive leaned forward. No offense, but this is highly unconventional. We've never promoted a delivery driver straight to management. James shrugged. Maybe that's the problem. The room fell silent. Alex took a deep breath. Look, I get it, he said. I don't have a fancy degree. I don't have years of corporate experience. But what I do have is first-hand knowledge of what's happening on the ground. He looked around the table. I've seen drivers barely able to make rent because their pay isn't enough. I've seen people working 16-hour shifts just to stay afloat. I've slept in my truck because I couldn't afford a place to live. He met each executive's gaze. So yeah, I might not have the traditional background, but I know what needs to change." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the woman in the suit folded her arms. "And what exactly would you change?" Alex didn't hesitate. "Better wages for drivers, safer working conditions, more reliable vehicles." A man across the table scoffed. "That all sounds nice, but where's the money coming from?" James interjected. "We've been looking at the numbers. There are ways to make this happen without hurting the company's bottom line." The executives exchanged glances. The woman in the suit finally sighed. "All right, let's see what you can do." Alex felt his shoulders relax slightly. This was his chance. Over the next few weeks, Alex threw himself into the job. He met with drivers, listened to their concerns, and worked to implement small but impactful changes. New trucks were ordered to replace the aging, unsafe fleet. A revised pay structure was put in place to ensure fair compensation. Scheduling improvements meant drivers weren't being overworked to the point of exhaustion. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. One afternoon, as Alex was reviewing reports in his office, a concept that still felt surreal, he heard a knock at the door. A young driver, maybe in his early 20s, stepped in. "Hey, I just wanted to say thanks." Alex raised an eyebrow. "For what?" The driver shifted nervously. "For everything you've been doing. Things are better now. People are actually excited to come to work." Alex felt a warmth in his chest. He nodded, just doing what needed to be done. The driver smiled. "Well, it means a lot." As the driver left, Alex leaned back in his chair, letting the moment sink in. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was making a difference. Alex sat at his desk, staring at the numbers on his screen. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't looking at a delivery manifest or a route schedule. Instead, he was analyzing company-wide logistics, cost reports, efficiency data, payroll adjustments. It still didn't feel real. A few months ago, he was just another guy hauling boxes, surviving paycheck to paycheck. Now, he was making decisions that affected thousands of employees. And the craziest part, things were actually improving. The new pay structure was already making an impact. Drivers were quitting less, morale was up, and delivery times were improving. The new trucks were rolling in, replacing the rusted-out ones that barely ran. But there was still a lot of work to do. James had given him an opportunity, but Alex refused to let that be the end of it. He wasn't just going to make things better. He was going to make sure no one else had to struggle the way he had. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in." Rick, the warehouse manager, stepped inside holding a clipboard. "You got a minute?" Alex nodded. "What's up?" Rick set the clipboard down. "Couple things. First, the new trucks are coming in ahead of schedule. We should have most of the fleet replaced within the next 2 months. Alex nodded. "That's good news." Rick hesitated. "Yeah, but there's something else." Alex frowned. "What is it?" Rick scratched the back of his head. "Drivers have been saying there's still an issue with one warehouse in particular." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" Rick slid the clipboard forward. "Westfield." Alex's stomach tightened. Westfield was one of the biggest warehouses in the company. If something was wrong there, it was a big deal. "What kind of issues?" Alex asked. Rick sighed. "Overworked drivers, mismanaged schedules, trucks breaking down. Basically, it's a mess." Alex exhaled. He thought things were improving across the board, but this was a problem that couldn't wait. "I need to see it for myself," Alex said. Rick smirked. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The next morning, Alex arrived at the Westfield warehouse unannounced. From the outside, everything looked fine. Trucks were lined up, packages were being moved, and workers were buzzing around the facility. But the moment he stepped inside, he could feel it. The tension. The workers weren't just busy, they looked exhausted. Drivers rushed in and out, some barely making eye contact. It reminded Alex too much of how things used to be. As he walked toward the loading dock, he overheard 2 drivers talking. "You get a break today?" One asked, the other shook his head. Nah, dispatch called me in early. I barely got any sleep last night. Alex clenched his jaw. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He approached one of the supervisors, a tall man with a clipboard and an impatient expression. "Hey," Alex said. "I'm Alex. I work in logistics." The man barely glanced at him. "Good for you, I'm busy." Alex narrowed his eyes. "I need to know what's going on here." The supervisor scoffed. "What's going on is that we're understaffed, overworked, and no one seems to care." Alex crossed his arms. "I care." The supervisor gave him a skeptical look. "Right, you're corporate. You guys don't do anything but make our jobs harder." Alex held his gaze. "I used to be a driver." That got the supervisor's attention. Alex continued. "I know exactly what it's like to work 16-hour days. I know what it's like to sleep in your truck because rent is too damn high. And I know what it's like to feel like no one at the top gives a damn about what happens to us." The supervisor studied him for a moment. Then he sighed. "All right, you really want to know what's going on?" Alex nodded. "Yeah, tell me everything." For the next 2 hours, Alex sat down with drivers, warehouse workers, and dispatchers, and what he learned made his blood boil. Drivers were being forced to work extra shifts without proper overtime pay. Trucks were breaking down constantly, but there weren't enough mechanics to fix them. And worst of all, management was ignoring it. One driver, a woman named Teresa, shook her head. "We've been complaining for months. Nothing changes." Alex frowned. "Who's in charge here?" Teresa gestured toward an office in the back of the warehouse. "Manager, in there, but good luck getting him to listen." Alex didn't waste a second. He marched straight toward the office, knocking once before pushing the door open. Inside, a man in a crisp button-down shirt sat at a desk sipping coffee. He looked up, frowning. "Can I help you?" Alex stepped forward. "Yeah, you can start by explaining why this warehouse is running drivers into the ground." The manager sighed dramatically, setting his coffee down. "Look, we're understaffed. It's not my fault." Alex narrowed his eyes. "So instead of fixing the problem, you just overwork the drivers?" The manager shrugged. "They can quit if they don't like it." Alex felt his fists tighten. This was exactly the kind of person who made life hell for people like him. "Let me make something clear," Alex said, voice steady. "Things are changing, whether you like it or not." The manager scoffed. "And who do you think you are?" Alex stepped forward. "I'm the guy who just got put in charge of logistics, and I don't care how long you've been running this place. This ends now." The manager's smirk faltered. "I'll be sending a full report to corporate," Alex continued. "And I'll make sure every single violation happening here gets addressed." The manager opened his mouth, but no words came out. Alex turned to leave, but before he walked out, he added one last thing. "And if I hear one more complaint about you ignoring your workers." Alex glanced over his shoulder. "I'll make sure you don't have this job much longer." The door shut behind him, and for the first time since he started this job, Alex felt unstoppable. Over the next few weeks, everything changed at the Westfield warehouse. The underpaid drivers, they got the raises they deserved. The broken-down trucks, replaced with brand-new ones, just like the one Alex had been gifted. The overworked schedules, fixed. More drivers were hired, shifts were balanced, and no one was being forced to work overtime just to survive. And the manager who ignored everyone's complaints, gone. Alex made sure of that. It wasn't easy. There were pushbacks, resistance, and plenty of people who doubted whether these changes would last. But Alex didn't back down, because he had been in these workers' shoes. He had been the guy struggling to make ends meet. He had been the driver who felt invisible to the people at the top. And now, he was the guy at the top, and he was going to make damn sure no one else had to go through what he did. One afternoon, James stopped by Alex's office. "You've been busy," James said, leaning against the doorframe. Alex chuckled. "Yeah, turns out fixing an entire system is a lot of work." James smirked. "And yet you pulled it off." Alex exhaled, shaking his head. I still can't believe it sometimes. Feels like just yesterday I was sleeping in my truck. James nodded. You ever think about that old truck? Alex laughed. Every time I get in my new one. James walked over and sat across from Alex's desk. I hope you realize something, Alex. You didn't just fix a broken warehouse. You set an example. Alex frowned. What do you mean? James leaned forward. People are talking about what you did at Westfield. Other warehouses are following your lead. Drivers who were thinking about quitting, they're staying. Workers who thought no one cared. Now they know someone does. Alex's eyes widened. He had been so focused on fixing one location that he hadn't stopped to think about how far the impact was spreading. James smiled. You changed more than just one warehouse, Alex. You changed the culture. Alex let that sink in. He had spent years believing that he was just another worker, just another guy trying to get by. But now, he was a leader, and he wasn't stopping here. A few months later, Alex pulled up to his new home, a real home with actual walls, a bed, and a front door that locked. He had finally done it. No more sleeping in his truck. No more worrying about whether he could afford rent. This was his. As he stepped inside, he heard tiny footsteps running toward him. Daddy! His daughter, Mia, launched herself into his arms. Alex laughed, lifting her up. Hey, princess. She pulled back, her small face glowing with excitement. Guess what? Alex smiled. What? Mia pointed toward the living room, where a pile of boxes sat waiting to be unpacked. I made my room look so cool. Alex chuckled. Oh yeah, you'll have to give me a tour. Mia nodded eagerly, but then her expression turned serious. Daddy? Yeah, baby. She rested her head on his shoulder. Are we staying here forever? Alex felt a lump in his throat. For so long, he had lived with the fear that nothing was permanent. That one wrong move could send everything crashing down, but not anymore. He hugged Mia tighter. Yeah, baby, we're staying. Mia smiled and snuggled into his chest. For the first time in his life, Alex wasn't just surviving. He was living. Later that night, as Alex sat on his porch, his phone buzzed. A message from James. Big meeting tomorrow, you ready? Alex smirked and typed back. Always. Because now he wasn't just a worker. He wasn't just another name on a payroll. He was proof that hard work, determination, and the right opportunity could change everything. And tomorrow he was going to keep making a difference. For every driver, for every worker, for everyone who had ever felt like they weren't seen. Because now, they had someone fighting for them, and he wasn't stopping anytime soon.